Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. So, I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through Reddit, when all of a sudden, an ear-piercing shriek rang out. I froze and immediately messaged my other half, who was upstairs. "Did you hear that?" He came down and saw me, ashen-faced, sitting frozen on the sofa. Our first thought was that someone was hurt. We live in the middle of nowhere. Behind our house, there are huge orchards and some woods. Not long ago, 2 murdered women were found in our area. One crime was very high profile in the UK, and the other was local. We instantly worried that some poor woman was being attacked, so we grabbed a torch and prepared to call 999. But there was nothing outside. I was very shaken, so my other half went to the neighbors. The adjoining house hadn't heard anything. Not a peep. The neighbors on the other side, who came out to fill their wheelie bin, said the same. I was dumbfounded. The scream was so loud it sounded like it was coming from inside the house. Neighbors suggested it could have been a fox. If anyone has heard mating foxes, you'll know it sounds awful. But this wasn't a fox screech. I've heard them many times before. It wasn't a cat either. Nor was it the pipes. The TV wasn't on, and I wasn't listening to music or a podcast. It was a woman's scream. After ruling out logical explanations, I started to wonder if it was paranormal. The thought had already crossed my mind because the scream instantly brought back a foul memory I've tried very hard to repress. Many years ago, when I lived with my mom, I saw a car parked outside the house through the living room window. It looked like my granddad's car. A woman was sitting in the back seat. I peered through the window to see if it was my nan, aunt, or cousin. I was excited about the possibility of an unannounced family visit. Then the woman, who did look a bit like my aunt, turned to look at me through the window. Her face was ashy gray. Her mouth opened unnaturally wide, with her jaw dropping further than it should. Then, right in my ear, I heard the loudest, shrillest scream I've ever heard. I dropped to the ground, out of sight of the window and the woman. Mom found me on the floor. I don't know how much time had passed, but I was too scared to move. The next morning, we got the news that Granddad had died in his sleep. Years later, I learned about the banshee. For anyone who doesn't know, the banshee is a figure in Irish and Welsh mythology. She is an omen of death. Before a death or a fatal illness or injury, she will appear to the family of the forsaken person and scream or wail. I live in England, but my family on both sides is Irish, and on my father's side, Welsh. I had heard the term banshee before, but I didn't know what it meant. I had only heard it used by older relatives, describing a particularly unpleasant or shrill woman. Would you get a load of her squawking? Sounds like a bloody banshee. I assumed it was an old-fashioned term for a noisy woman. There are a lot of those. It was only a few years later, when I got interested in mythology, that I found out what the term actually means, and that I had encountered one. So was that what I heard the other night? I texted my parents to see if they were okay. Sorry it's late. Weird question. You good? They both replied that they were fine. My nan, my only living grandparent, has cancer and is about to have an important scan. My dad was fine, but also needed a scan. My mom was doing well, but informed me that a great-aunt had died, although she passed 10 days before the scream. If it was for her, the banshee was very late. None of these things were out of the blue. Dad is getting on in years, and scans are regular. The great-aunt was 90 and had been in the hospital for some time before her passing. So the banshee, if that is indeed what the scream was, couldn't be related. Sorry for the essay, and thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm honestly quite anxious, and it's still ringing through my head. Any thoughts or suggestions, paranormal or not, would be greatly appreciated. My gran was from Ireland. She told me and my cousin scary bedtime stories about the banshee. She once told us that when she was 13, she was running an errand for her mom with her sister Mary. They had to go through a wooded area to get to the next small town, which was their destination. There was a small stream where the kids used to fish and play. As they were approaching the stream, Mary said to Gran, "What's that, Annie?" They both stopped and looked. Beside the stream, with her back to them, was the figure of a woman with long dark hair. She wore a light-colored dress, and her feet were bare. They stayed silent and could hear soft, gentle weeping. Without waiting another minute, Gran said she and Mary turned and ran the other way as fast as they could. When they got home, they told their dad about their adventure. Their mom wasn't too happy that they returned without completing the errand. Their dad said it was probably the banshee. Their mom just rolled her eyes and mumbled something under her breath. The next day, a younger child the family knew was found face down in the stream, in the same place where they had seen the woman. It is said that the banshee shows up just before a tragedy or death. Years later, I did some research and found that the banshee can also be known as a bringer of bad tidings, not just of death. Irish folklore is littered with mysterious and terrifying creatures, the kind that sound so unbelievable, yet people speak of them with such conviction that you can't help but wonder if there may be a layer of truth buried in there. Older generations in particular still hold a belief in the fairy folk and the lore of ancient Ireland. Before she passed away, my grandmother would sit us down in her cottage and fill its walls with tales of all kinds of spirits. From silently watchful black hounds to the kelpie, a water horse that would seduce you into riding it before darting into the depths of a lake or loch, her stories were vivid and haunting. When my parents came to collect us, Mum would scowl upon discovering the ghost story session, knowing neither my brother nor I would be getting much sleep that night. Still, I cherish those fireplace memories. They take me back to a simpler time when the dark winter evenings were filled with life in the form of Granny's lilting, aged voice. My favorite of these creatures, or perhaps least favorite, given the endless nightmares it implanted into my young mind, was the banshee. A spirit tied to particular families, the banshee is said to appear in various forms, favoring either a beautiful but distraught woman or a hunched, ailing washerwoman. Even more distinct, however, is her unearthly cry. Her wails and weeps fill the air, audible either within a room or from miles away across the countryside. The person who encounters the banshee or hears her cry is compelled to alert their family, for it signals that someone from the family has died or is about to die. Yes, the banshee is an omen of death. As I grew older, I became cynical about the tales my grandmother had told. At 18, I moved to the city for university. Immersing myself in modern life, the ways of the countryside seemed to evaporate, reflecting the increasingly modernized world. It's sad when you think about it, isn't it? That was until one particular summer. My parents had recently downsized to a small cottage deep in the barren Irish West, where the roar of city life was inaudible. I stayed with them for the month of July, spending long, languid days roaming the fields, looking out for wildlife like foxes at dusk or bats flying low along the lanes, which were laden with sprawling plant life. My story begins during the second week of my stay. I had taken to twilight walks, enjoying the northern sun, which lingered in the sky until nearly 11 at night. I was some miles from the house, sensing darkness approaching, and decided to head back. It was during my walk home that I heard it, the most startling, biting cry. It seemed to fill the world around me, echoing against invisible walls in the open air. I can describe it only as the sound of a woman in sharp pain, yet equally that of a grieving mother sobbing at the loss of a child. I was momentarily horrified. In an instant, all my cynicism evaporated, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run. What sort of creature could produce such a sound? But then I forced myself to apply logic. Could it have been a fox? They can make spine-tingling noises, especially when distressed or in heat. Whatever it was, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I decided to run home and alert my parents, just in case someone truly was in distress. But as I began jogging, something in the periphery of my vision stopped me dead in my tracks. To my left lay bogland, a treacherous area I had been warned to avoid, where one could easily sink into the wet ground and suffocate. Yet in the midst of the bog stood a woman. Her long, silvery blonde hair twisted in the evening breeze. Despite the encroaching darkness, I could make out enough to see she was around my age, her face contorted in either pain or horror. It was from her mouth that the bone-chilling screams were emerging. Initially, I was stunned. This was so unlike anything I'd experienced in this quiet, uneventful countryside. Shaking myself, I called out as loudly as I could. "Hello? What's wrong? Are you stuck?" The woman's small eyes turned toward me, but she didn't respond. Her scream, unrelenting, pounded in my head. "Hello? I'm going to get help. I'll be back as soon as I can." With that, I tore my gaze from her and ran home as fast as I could. I was about a mile away, and with phone signals unreliable in the area, I knew I'd need to get home to call for assistance. It would have been dangerous to walk across the bog toward her. When I arrived home, my parents' warm faces quickly turned to alarm upon seeing me. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." I explained what I had seen. Without hesitation, my father and I jumped into the car to return to the spot while my mother stayed behind to alert the Gardai, the local police. By car, we were there within minutes, but when we arrived, there was no sign of the woman. The area was eerily silent, the only sounds those of the countryside at night. We scanned the bogland thoroughly, but there was nothing. When the Gardai arrived, the constable questioned me about what I had seen. After relaying the story, I watched his reaction carefully. He remained neutral, scribbling notes, then paused thoughtfully. "I'll investigate this further," he said. "But I want you to do me a favor. Check in with your family tonight. Just check in." My mother nodded, understanding something unspoken in his words. Later that evening, my mother received a message from her brother-in-law. "Hi, Bridget. Tried to contact you earlier. Please call." When she returned the call, she learned that her sister, living in the US, had passed away suddenly that evening. The death shook us. In the days that followed, we busied ourselves with funeral arrangements, but I couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the bog and the constable's words. My logical mind protested, but my memory wandered back to Granny's stories of the banshee. Could this have been a warning? It took 2 years before I voiced these thoughts to my mother. To my surprise, she admitted that years before, she had heard a similar cry on the night of my grandmother's passing. Her response gave me a sense of closeness to my family, culture, and land that I hadn't felt before. Perhaps some tales, no matter how outlandish, hold a seed of truth. So the other night, I was sitting on my porch smoking a cigarette, as I usually do late at night. I was home alone, my boyfriend was at work at the time, and I just heard a really loud screaming. I looked behind me and saw what appeared to be a woman walking down the street, screaming at the top of her lungs. She looked right at me. My initial thought was that maybe it was just some weirdo or someone under the influence of something. But after more thought, I realized the scream didn't really sound human. It sounded like something I'd never heard before. After that, I thought maybe it was a skinwalker, but my mother informed me that chances are it was a banshee. For some backstory on why I think maybe she's warning me of my boyfriend's passing, a couple of nights before the potential banshee sighting, my mom and I had very similar dreams. In my dream, my boyfriend had passed, and I was trying to figure out how to cope with his death. In my mom's dream, I was giving birth to a child and kept saying, "I need to take care of the baby." I promised their father I would, hinting at the idea that the father was dead. I don't know what I saw, but I'm hoping for some insight on banshees to help me figure it out. I saw online that Irish families can have their own banshee. I'm third-generation American from an Irish family, if that has any relevance. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.